My name is Daniel Brooks, and by the time my marriage started dying, it barely made a sound. From the outside, Claire and I still looked solid. We lived in a clean two-story house in a suburb outside Denver with trimmed hedges, a cracked basketball hoop over the garage, and two kids who had grown up believing stability was the same thing as happiness. Ava was 16, sharp-eyed and observant in the way teenagers get when they stop trusting what adults say. Noah was 13, quieter, still young enough to think tension could be ignored if nobody raised their voice. That was the strange part. Claire and I didn't fight much anymore. Fighting requires heat. What we had was colder than that. We moved around each other like practiced strangers. In the mornings, I would stand at the kitchen counter with black coffee while she scrolled through her phone in silk workout clothes, already half gone before the day began. At night, we sat in the same living room under the same warm lamps, separated by cushions and silence, pretending the TV filled the distance. Sometimes she laughed at something on her screen, and the sound felt so misplaced it made me look up. I stayed because of the kids. That was the reason I gave myself, and maybe for a while it was true. I told myself that routine mattered. That packed lunches, mortgage payments, school pickups, and family dinners counted for something. That if I kept the machine running, maybe nobody would notice the engine had been failing for years. But I noticed. I noticed how Claire stopped asking where I'd been, because she no longer cared. I noticed how she dressed better to leave the house than to come home. I noticed how every conversation between us became logistical. Noah's soccer schedule, Ava's grades, the leaking faucet, the grocery list. We weren't married anymore. We were managing a household with wedding rings on. And somewhere in that silence, I stopped waiting for things to get better. I just started paying attention. The sentence landed on a Tuesday morning while the coffee was still too hot to drink. Claire was standing by the kitchen island in pale gray leggings and a white zip-up top, one hand around a travel mug, the other tapping at her phone. Sunlight came through the back windows and caught the edge of her wedding ring. For a second, everything looked ordinary enough to frame. Then she said, "I think my life would be simpler without you." That was it. No anger. No trembling voice. No build-up. No accusation. No dramatic pause. Just a flat, almost thoughtful remark, like she was commenting on the weather or deciding to cancel a subscription. She didn't even look at me right away. She said it to the counter first, then lifted her eyes like she expected me to absorb it quietly. And I did. I remember setting my mug down with more care than usual. I watched a thin line of steam rise between us. Somewhere upstairs, Noah's shower was running. Ava was probably still in bed, buried under blankets, hitting snooze for the third time. The house sounded alive in all the normal ways, which made her words feel even colder. A year earlier, I might have asked her what she meant. I might have pushed back, demanded honesty, tried to drag some real emotion out of her. But by then, I already knew better. People only say something that clean when they've rehearsed it in private. So I nodded once. She seemed almost disappointed by that. That's all. I reached for my jacket from the chair by the door. "You finally said it out loud," I told her. Her expression changed then, just slightly. Not guilt. Not regret. More like uncertainty, as if she had expected a scene and didn't know what to do without one. I slipped my keys into my pocket and opened the front door. The cold Denver air hit me hard enough to wake the rest of me up. When I walked to my car, I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was certain, because the truth was, that moment hadn't broken anything. It had only confirmed that what I'd been quietly preparing for was finally here. I didn't drive far, just enough to get distance from the house without drawing attention. There's a small lakeside parking lot outside Boulder I'd been using for months. It's quiet in the mornings, just a few early joggers, an old man feeding birds, the kind of place where nobody asks questions if you sit in your car longer than you should. I parked facing the water. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. My hands rested on the steering wheel for a moment longer than necessary, not out of hesitation, but out of habit. I had replayed this exact sequence so many times that it felt less like a decision and more like following instructions I'd already written. From the outside, nothing about me had changed. Same job. Same schedule. Same routines. I still took out the trash on Thursdays, still showed up to Noah's games, still helped Ava with late-night homework when she pretended she didn't need it. Claire saw consistency. She never noticed the adjustments. The separate account opened under a consulting pretext. The quiet shift in asset allocations. The documents reviewed late at night under the glow of a laptop screen she assumed was work. The meetings I took in my car, instead of my office. A year of small, invisible movements. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a second phone. It was plain, black, unremarkable. No notifications. No clutter. Just a single interface I had built piece by piece, testing it, refining it, making sure there were no gaps. I turned it on. The screen lit up instantly. One dashboard.
Clean.
Minimal. Every shared element of our life mapped into categories: financial, legal, utilities, access. It didn't look dramatic. It looked efficient. That was the point. I stared at it for a few seconds, watching the reflection of the lake ripple faintly across the glass. My thumb hovered, not because I was unsure, but because I understood exactly what this would do. This wasn't an argument. It was a transition. I tapped once. Nothing happened at first. No dramatic alert. No sound. Just a quiet confirmation on the screen. One line of text that read, "Process initiated." I set the phone down on the center console and looked out at the lake. A light wind moved across the surface, breaking the reflection into fragments. It felt appropriate. The system wasn't designed to shock. It was designed to shift. One by one, the structures that held our life together began to reroute. Not disappear, just change direction. The house utilities transferred fully into my name, something I had legally prepared months earlier under the guise of simplifying billing. Shared subscriptions, streaming, storage, even the family calendar were quietly reassigned or closed. Nothing loud, nothing obvious, but everything precise. Claire always believed control was about what you could see. Bank balances, cards in her wallet, apps on her phone. She never considered what sat underneath those things, the ownership, the permissions, the legal framework holding it all in place. That's where I had been working. The car lease she used daily flagged for review under a clause tied to income verification. A clause I had updated during our last refinancing discussion, when she signed without reading past the first page. Insurance policies split into individual coverage. Joint access permissions revoked in stages, timed so nothing triggered suspicion too early. It wasn't destruction. It was separation. I picked up the phone again and watched the progress indicators move steadily forward. Each step confirmed, logged, irreversible without intervention she no longer had access to. For a moment, I thought about the version of me from a year ago, the one still sitting at that same kitchen counter, convincing himself that silence was manageable. This was the difference. Back then I was reacting. Now I was finishing something I had already decided. I turned the phone off, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot without looking back. Claire always left the house at 9:10. That morning she was right on time. I was already miles away when it started. First, the garage didn't open. She tried twice, then a third time, pressing the button harder like pressure could fix access. It wasn't broken. It had simply stopped recognizing her permissions. The override code she kept on her phone had already been invalidated. I imagined the pause, the small crease forming between her eyebrows. Then her phone. The first notification would have looked harmless. Account update confirmed. Then another. And another. Within seconds, they would stack on top of each other. Each one clean, formal, and impossible to ignore. Access restricted. Session expired. Verification required. Claire wasn't careless. She would have opened her banking app immediately, tried to log in, watched it reject her credentials, not because they were wrong, but because her role had changed. Secondary access. Limited visibility. Not gone. Just reduced. That's what would confuse her the most. I didn't erase her. I repositioned her. I pictured her stepping out of the car, sunlight hitting the driveway, her hand tightening slightly around her phone as she refreshed the screen again and again, waiting for it to correct itself. It wouldn't. By then, the car lease flag would have triggered a notification too. A routine review request, framed as administrative, but enough to prevent any immediate changes or transfers. Another small wall. Individually, each issue was manageable. Together, they formed something else. A pattern she couldn't control. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't leave instructions or explanations. Silence was intentional, because explanations invite negotiation. And I was already past that point. By the time she realized this wasn't a glitch, I was already checked out mentally, legally, and in every way that mattered. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting on her to decide anything. I already had. At 3:42 p.m., both Ava and Noah received the same message. Not from Claire. From me. A private link. No explanation. No warning. Just a short line beneath it. You deserve to understand what's happening. I timed it carefully. Ava would be out of school, probably sitting in her car scrolling before driving home. Noah would be just getting off the bus, backpack half-zipped, already reaching for his phone out of habit. They opened it within minutes of each other. The page was simple.
Clean.
Just like everything else I built. A timeline. At the top, dates. Then transactions. Transfers that didn't match our normal spending patterns. Amounts that grew over time, small at first, almost unnoticeable, then larger, more deliberate. Each entry backed by receipts, confirmations, screenshots. Below that, messages. Not long conversations. Not dramatic confessions. Just enough. Fragments of exchanges between Claire and a man whose name neither of them had ever heard before. Casual at first. Then familiar. Then something else. And threaded through all of it, money. Investments she never mentioned. Funds pulled from accounts meant for tuition, for savings, for stability. Redirected quietly into a startup tied directly to him. A company that existed more on promises than proof. I didn't label anything. I didn't need to. Ava would understand immediately. She always did. She'd scroll slower than most, catching patterns, connecting details, her jaw tightening the further she went. Noah would take longer. He'd reread things.
Pause.
Try to make sense of it in pieces instead of the whole. That's why I structured it the way I did. So neither of them had to rely on my version. Just facts. By the time they reached the bottom, there was nothing left to explain. Only one realization. This hadn't started that morning. It had been happening for a long time. Ava got home first. She didn't slam the door. That wasn't her style. She walked in quietly, dropped her keys on the kitchen counter with a controlled motion, and stood there for a second longer than usual, like she was steadying herself. Claire was already there, sitting at the island, phone in her hand. Screen lighting up every few seconds with another notification she still couldn't fully process. For the first time in years, she looked unsettled. Ava, she said too quickly. Something's wrong with the accounts. I think your dad. Stop. Ava's voice cut clean through the room. Not loud. Not emotional. Just final. Claire blinked, caught off guard. I saw it, Ava said, lifting her phone slightly. All of it. Silence stretched between them.
Thick. Heavy.
Claire opened her mouth, but nothing came out. That's when Noah walked in. He looked from Ava to Claire, already sensing the shift. What's going on? Ava didn't look at him. Check your phone.
He did.
Right there in the kitchen, backpack still hanging off one shoulder. He opened the link. His eyes moved slower, like I knew they would. Line by line. Date by date.
Claire stood up then.
It's not what it looks like. Then what is it? Ava snapped. That was the first crack. Real emotion. Real anger. Claire's composure slipped for half a second. Then she tried to recover it. I was making an investment. For us. You don't understand how these things. With him. Ava cut in. Another silence. Noah finally looked up. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't accuse. He just asked, why did you lie to all of us? Claire looked at him. And had no answer. Not a real one. In that moment, something shifted in both of them. Not explosive. Not dramatic.
Just distance.
The kind that doesn't close again. By the time the house fell quiet again, I was already somewhere else. A small rental on the edge of a neighboring town. Nothing impressive. One bedroom, plain walls, a narrow kitchen that smelled faintly like fresh paint and cleaning supplies. The kind of place people pass through, not settle in. It was enough. I set my bag down by the door and took a slow look around. No photos. No shared history. No background noise of a life that had been unraveling for years. Just space. I had arranged it weeks earlier. Lease signed under my name only. Utilities pre-activated. Basic furniture delivered in stages, so nothing felt rushed or suspicious. Even the coffee maker was already on the counter, the same model I used at home. Familiar, but not attached to anything. Continuity, without connection. My phone buzzed once on the table. An email. The logistics company I'd been consulting for had been waiting. Patient. Quiet like everything else I had set in motion. A short message, direct. "We're ready when you are." I replied with a single line. "I'm available." No hesitation. This wasn't an escape. I hadn't run from anything. Every step that brought me here had been measured, timed, deliberate. Even the work, I had been building that transition in parallel, taking on projects slowly, proving value before making it official. Outside, the street was still. No familiar cars. No neighbors who knew my name. No expectations. For the first time in a long time, my environment matched my reality. Uncomplicated. I sat down at the small kitchen table and opened my laptop, already shifting into the next phase. Not because I needed distraction, because I was done looking back. Claire hired a lawyer within 48 hours. I expected that. What I didn't expect was how quickly the narrative shifted. At first, it was standard. Asset division. Access disputes. Urgency wrapped in formal language. Her side tried to frame my actions as abrupt, excessive, and overreach meant to destabilize. I didn't respond emotionally. I sent documentation. Everything I had already compiled, timelines, transaction logs, account structures, signed agreements, organized and cross-referenced.
Clean. Precise.
Difficult to argue with. That's when her lawyer found it. Not the messages. Not the relationship. The numbers. Buried beneath the transfers and investment entries was a pattern that hadn't fully surfaced until everything was laid out side by side. The startup she had been funding, the one tied to him, wasn't just unstable. It was collapsing. Irregular filings. Missed disclosures. Funds redirected in ways that raised questions neither of them had prepared for. What Claire thought was growth was exposure. Significant exposure. Her lawyer requested a private review. Then another. The tone changed after that. Suddenly, this wasn't about me pulling away from the marriage. It wasn't about control or access or even betrayal. It became something else entirely. Containment. Because if those investments had continued unchecked, they wouldn't have just drained our accounts. They would have taken everything tied to them down with it, including assets still legally connected to both of us. The system I triggered didn't just separate finances. It froze the damage in place. For the first time since this started, Claire wasn't just reacting to me. She was reacting to what she had done, and realizing piece by piece how close it came to costing all of us more than she could explain away. Months passed without noise. No dramatic court battles. No public scenes. Just paperwork, decisions, and the slow, controlled separation of everything that used to define our life. Noah chose to live with me. He didn't make a speech about it. One evening, sitting across from me at the small kitchen table, he just said, "It's quieter here." That was enough. I nodded, and we moved forward. Ava split her time. She kept more distance from both of us than she admitted, but I saw it in the way she asked questions now.
Direct.
Careful. No longer assuming the answers would be simple. Claire tried with her, calls, messages, attempts to rebuild, but trust doesn't respond to effort alone. It responds to consistency. And that takes time. Claire's world didn't collapse all at once. It narrowed. The house felt bigger, without stability in it. The financial pressure didn't disappear. It settled in, steady and unavoidable. The man she had tied those decisions to faded out of relevance quickly once the numbers stopped working in his favor. What remained was accountability. As for me, I built something smaller. A modest house. Clean lines. Functional. No excess. My work stabilized into something reliable, something I controlled fully. No hidden layers. No parallel systems running underneath. Just clarity. In the mornings, I made coffee in silence, not the heavy kind that used to sit between two people, but a quiet that felt earned. Noah would pass through the kitchen, grab something quick, and head out without tension hanging in the air. Normal in a way that didn't require pretending. Sometimes I thought about the life I had before. Not with regret. Not even with anger. Just recognition. I hadn't lost it in a single moment. I had been living without it for a long time. And walking away didn't break anything that was still whole. It just made that truth impossible to ignore.